Archaeology is back. Over the past few months, over the last year in 2021, across the UK, a series of excavations have been ongoing at sites, discovering more about what life was like for these people living there hundreds, sometimes thousands of years ago. And today I've come to one such site, a beautiful location situated in the heart of Northumberland countryside, roughly 1 mile from the historic landmark that is Hadrian's Wall. A jewel of Roman and early medieval archaeology, it's a place that already boasts a plethora of extraordinary artifacts, from Roman boxing gloves to early Christian graffiti to its namesake writing tablets. This is Vindolanda.
Over the course of 2021, the team at Vindolanda, including a passionate group of volunteers, have picked up the trowel once more, intent on learning more about this beautiful ancient site. I've headed up to Vindolanda to see what they found so far.
This is unbelievable.
So this is a metal cover for something inside.
And what's still to come.
And it tells us that the dark ages are not so dark.
It'll blow us away what we're going to be finding coming out next.
Last year, I visited Vindolanda as part of a series of documentaries all about Hadrian's Wall. And ever since then, I've been itching to return to this stunning site. Now, as 2021 nears its end, I've headed north to see what discoveries they've made this year.
Welcome to the Vindolanda excavations. We're right in the heart of the site here, and this is where we've been operating for the past 6 months.
Just before we go into this excavation in particular, talk to me about excavations at Vindolanda in general. This is like right at the heart of what you do, isn't it?
Yeah, it's 51 years now, more or less continually, we've been working at this site. We've got 100 years to go before we explore this huge place. But really, at the core of what the Trust is all about is community excavation, getting people involved in the archaeology of the site, allowing people to have the opportunity to make a direct impact themselves on the history of this planet. You know, what's better than making your own discoveries and being part of that picture, that framework of our understanding of what happened in the past.
Vindolanda as a site, it seems to have all of this history stretching centuries. There are multiple layers to this site, varying from ancient times to early medieval times.
It does. I mean, we start in about AD 85 with timber forts. By the time we get to the mid-2nd century, we're on fort number 6. We're standing in fort number 9, but that's not the end. So we get to the end of Roman Britain, or what is the end of Roman Britain, that's another question, into somewhere around the 5th century. And then we've got another 300 or 400 years of history remaining on this site, layered on top. It's a giant cake, and each layer of that cake is another period of British history. Well, Vindolanda, in essence, is a fort and military community on the edge of the Roman Empire, situated in the beautiful rolling landscape of Northumberland. It's a time capsule where so much has been left behind by so many people, still in position over 2,000 years ago, that we can learn about the detail and minutiae of daily life in a way that you can't really do from many other places.
The solution to finding out who lived in these structures and what were the purposes of these structures, and even what's the chronological order that all these structures went up one on top of the other, is truly excavation.
Lots of stunning and diverse artifacts have been discovered over the past 50 years at Vindolanda. Most extraordinary of all are the writing tablets, preserved within the waterlogged anaerobic soil layers that the site is famous for.
They are tiny sheets of wood, the size of a postcard and the consistency of wet paper as you excavate them. So while they might not look glamorous as they come out of the soil, they tell us something that no other find can. You can tell from a piece of pot what a person perhaps ate for dinner by looking at organic residue analysis, but you can never tell from an object how someone felt about something. And the tablets really fill that gap. They tell us how people felt about things. So those are the most extraordinary finds from the anaerobic. Of course, something that really strikes a chord with the public is also the shoes. We've got a collection of 7,000 leather objects, and of them, more than 5,000 are shoes. Of those shoes, a good percentage is shoes from women and children, thus contradicting the perceived wisdom that Vindolanda and Hadrian's Wall was a place where men trumped around with their spears and their shields and did nothing but war.
From writing tablets to weapons, the Vindolanda team have unearthed many remarkable finds during previous excavation seasons, and they were hoping to find more in the Big Dig of 2021.
The first thing that we wanted to do in 2021 was to roll out the grass from the excavation area and expose all of the post-Roman and the 3rd and 4th century buildings on the site.
We also thought that it wasn't going to produce a lot of stuff because, it used to be called the Dark Ages for a reason. There wasn't very much stuff coming out of the ground at the end of Roman Britain. They're not ceramic anymore. They're not using coins. The material culture that they had, they tended to recycle. But we got some nice surprises.
With their aims established, in late March 2021, the dig began. Straight away, the team set their sights on a Roman building right at the edge of the excavation area, the Scola.
Let's come through the door here and step on in to a 3rd century Scola, an officers' clubhouse, an officers' mess. So we had a little bit of this structure on show last year. We just started to excavate. But as we continued to excavate this building, this space, we really uncovered the full length of the building. More room divides, more ovens, and really get a sense of this is a sort of manufacturing place for food and for people to hang out and just have a good time.
Scolas are some of my favorite buildings. They are amazing in that they form not only a social hubbub, but also a kind of administrative one in which the decision-making, or the informal decision-making, if you wish, is taking place. They really bring to life the whole idea of a community at Vindolanda for me.
It would have been a 2-story building, but of course the top story's gone. You can imagine it decked out with tables and trellises and people eating and having merriment in here. And we got some lovely artifacts from this building, including quite a lot of coins from the space that we're standing in. Now that's useful to us because it tells us that although this is the officers' clubhouse and things would be relatively cheap for the officers to get their food and drink, they'd still have to pay for the stuff that they were being served in this building. And of course, we know from the writing tablets that people had to pay a fee to be a member of this clubhouse in the early forts and early periods. So we know quite a lot about Roman officers at Vindolanda, where we've got several names, not just from the writing tablets, but also from inscriptions on stones, and we know they had their families with them. And there are spaces in those forts, not just Vindolanda, but right across the empire, where certain classes of people don't have an official home. So we're talking about here about the quartermaster, the vet, the doctor. If they're living inside the fort, they're unlikely to be in traditional barracks. And so our officers' mess, our officers' clubhouse, isn't just a place they go to eat. It's a place they probably lived in too. And that's really, really important to find those homes for people who would otherwise be homeless in the archaeological record.
The fact that the Scola had already been partly excavated in 2020 made it all the more important to excavate this area first.
As the elements and the weather gets at the buildings and the stones, they start to degrade a little bit. So we have to excavate this building in its completeness to be able to get all of the material possible and to be able to preserve what we've got before we put the site to bed for the winter time.
And what are some highlight objects that you discovered from this area of the excavation?
We've had everything from rather erotic Samian pottery to lead vessels with, well, little phalluses inside.
One thing about the Roman Empire, there were phalluses everywhere.
Yes, they certainly were. And, they're good luck symbols. And we can probably say that people who lived in this or worked in this space were very lucky people.
Of course, from the spaces in which food was consumed, you would also expect a little bit of droppings, if you will. So bits that are not very well secured, buckles, bits of earrings, bits of brooches, things that have dropped onto the floor and that we've found thousands of years later.
I'm keen to have a look at some of these objects discovered during the excavation.
So on this table in front of us, we have a selection of our best finds from the 2021 season.
And there was no shortage of finds unearthed from the Scola.
Here we have a lovely griffin foot. You can see there's a sort of lead plug connection, which probably would have stuck it into a box. So you can just imagine 4 of these in the 4 corners having a really cute box. So that's really quite interesting and brings it to life for me to think that someone had this really precious box with the little griffin feet.
We get all sorts of little artifacts which are associated with personal references to people's religion or their beliefs. And the griffin, of course, is an important beast, an ancient beast which guards things, particularly guards money or other things like this. Some of the occupants of that space were wealthy individuals, some of the most wealthy individuals, in fact. Every soldier is in the upper 30% of wealthy people in Britain, but the officers, of course, are a step or two well above that. So it sort of sets your imagination going. What kind of stuff did these guys have with them? What were they storing in those buildings and spaces? And why did they need a representation of a griffin, this ancient mythical beast, to guard the stuff that they had? Each artifact like that gives you a little window into a bigger picture, into a bigger scene. And it reminds you of the things that you can't see as well as the things that are before you.
But the griffin foot wasn't the only extraordinary find discovered from the Scola.
So Marta, I mean, this is something which seems to have taken the internet by storm. What is it?
Dog lovers all over the world have just pounced on this tile. The tile itself is nothing special, but what made this tile is this lovely dog.
It's
paw print.
beautiful. It's really lovely. It's like this imprint from a moment of time.
Now I'm going to give you a quiz. How many dog prints can you see?
I'm guessing this is wrong, but it looks like 1.
It's actually 2. How you can detect the second paw print is that there is actually claw marks right in the middle of the first paw print.
That's what it is.
So this doggy was just going for a nice run and someone shouted him off the tiles and off obediently he went.
Bricks and tiles need to be left out in tile yards and they need to dry. And so this gives the animal kingdom at Vindolanda ample opportunity to leave its footmark, its impression on us through history and through the past.
There has been a lot of research done at Vindolanda, but also wider on the Roman frontier about the domestication of dogs. We've got quite a lot of information about what breeds of dogs would have been available to the Romans, going from the rather yappy terriers used to control pests like rat, onto much bigger breeds, similar to our modern-day Irish wolfhound, which would have been used for hunting purposes.
And in terms of other pets, we've only got 2 or 3 partial cat skeletons from the site. So dogs versus cats in military contexts, well, the dogs are winning by a long, long way. And we may have had wild cats coming in and things like that, but mainly dogs. We have, of course, evidence of foxes and other wild creatures around about, deer, wild boar. It's quite a menagerie of different animals that the Romans interfaced with. But perhaps a pet that you wouldn't think of. We found evidence from the granaries just adjacent to the Scola, just across the road, where when we excavated that building in 2008, we found the little dung balls from 2 or 3 owls. Now, those owls must have been encouraged to occupy that granary space just across the road from where we're excavating now, so they can keep the mouse infestation down. It gives us a different essence, a different sense of how the Romans are using all of the landscape around them to their advantage while they're living at the site.
What is this huge object here?
Well, this is a quite hefty stone weight, flat on the bottom and an egg shape at the top, and it's got this bit of iron sticking out, which probably would have been a hoop or a hook to attach it to something.
So the stone weight is unusual to survive in such good condition with its iron still in the top of the weight. And I think personally that could have been used to attach to some bellows to help to fuel the furnaces and the fires as a counterweight. So if you're pushing up with the bellows, then you just let the weight pull the bellows down, and it keeps putting extra oxygen into the fires to give you a really hot furnace. It's quite a tight space in the Scola, the officers' clubhouse. It's only 4 meters wide, And the oven at the end of the building takes up most of that room. So you can imagine, getting a good draft into the building could be very, very difficult. So items like that give us a little bit of an indication of how, again, that space is used and some of the cute little techniques the Romans are employing to get the best out of that technology.
Discover the past with exclusive ancient history documentaries and ad-free podcasts presented by world-renowned historians from History Hit. Watch them on your smart TV or on the go with your mobile device. Download the app now to explore everything from the wonders of Pompeii to the rebellion of Boudica and the mysteries of prehistoric Scotland. Immerse yourself in the captivating stories of this remarkable era by signing up via the link in the description. The Schola produced a series of interesting artefacts, but this was only the beginning. There was still so much more to do.
So if this was the first place you were excavating during the season, what did the rest of the site look like at that time? What was the first layer that you had to excavate elsewhere?
Just an incredible mound of rubble. So once you get under the turf and topsoil, the end of Roman Britain is a collapsed monument of rubble and debris all over the place. It looks almost unintelligible from the ground. It's best viewed from the air, where you can start to unpick the individual buildings and work out where the Britons have built their timber structures inside the collapse of Roman Britain. This is the material put down in the post-Roman period. So you've got to imagine heaps of rubble on top of this, and then careful excavation to expose what used to be a very big rubble yard. Well, once you get under the turf, you're dealing with the end of Roman Britain and what happens next. The British people coming next are mainly putting timber construction through the end of Roman Britain. And what they're putting their timber buildings through are the collapsed rubble of all the Roman structures that came before it. And of course, those buildings are collapsing onto the street, they're collapsing inside of rooms.
The post-Roman inhabitants of Vindolanda moved things around to reuse them as foundations for timber building, sometimes respecting the previous constructions and sometimes completely ignoring them, blocking up roads and throwing out entire rooms and entire spaces.
And so you literally have a mound of discombobulated rubble right across the site.
And frankly, it's the biggest field of rocks I've witnessed in 10 years of being an archaeologist.
Getting through the rubble layer was a big challenge for the Vindolanda team, but soon, emerging from the debris, the rewards came.
So as we start to gently work back through the rubble, some structures start to appear, where you start to see patterns developing amongst those stones. Like joining the dots, you start to see a building that's long, long gone start to reappear before your eyes, as you can get a sense of where you are in that space. Ovens and other features like that start to appear, domestic spaces. And our biggest surprise, perhaps, as we came back across the rubble, was yet another apsidal structure, another church, sitting amongst that rubble at the site. Right over there, sandwiched between the buildings, at the edge of this cobbled street, you've got to imagine a big apsidal structure, a church, facing west. It's church number 6 in Vindolanda.
So what do we know about these churches? And why did they come to dominate Vindolanda?
We are now at a stage in which we have several churches at Vindolanda. There is 2 main styles of construction. One is a sort of reuse of earlier 4th century structures. So you have a square room, and onto that square room an apse is bolted. However, in the quadrant that we've been investigating during the 2021 season, what we had is a different style of church, which is shaped a bit like a rocket. It's got a straight nave and an apse at the end.
We know that it had a timber building that was built across the top of it, so it wasn't the last thing that was built in that part of the site. So most likely 5th century in date.
It's interesting that those churches really start to proliferate at Vindolanda. We are starting to have more numerous churches in the rocket style than we have in the earlier basilica shape, kind of very Roman inspired. So it seems like there is an evolution in the shape of the church from something more adhering to Christianity in the Roman period to something completely different, perhaps more apt to the Celtic Christianity that comes from places like Iona.
We know now that little bit of the history of the place. We know that it's gone from being a military base to a warband centre with some Christians to a monastic base or a monastic centre in the 5th and 6th centuries. And that's a real win, because until the excavations over the last few years took place, the last part of that story was still an unfolding enigma. But now, after the work we've been doing this year and the previous couple, we can say with absolute surety that we have a monastic centre at Vindolanda in the 5th and 6th centuries.
This post-Roman Christian presence at Vindolanda was further affirmed by the artefacts discovered around the church.
We found some beautiful painted pottery, Cranbeck painted parchment ware, where you have little Christian crosses in palm leaves painted onto the bottom of the vessels. And what somebody's done in the 5th and 6th century, they've taken this very late Roman pottery and they've curated it. They've knocked off the sides of the vessels, just preserved the cross bit and kept that as a little artifact or as a souvenir, as something sacred to them.
So by the end of the Roman occupation, these symbols here become a Christian symbol. So for example, the palm leaves there, or even just a drawing of a ship becomes a symbol of God and the safe passage of the soul.
Most intriguingly of all, for me anyway, we got a very badly carved stone in the rubble of that building, which appears to carry an inscription which may say, "Yakit, here lies," which is a Christian, of course, way to explain, here lies somebody in the ground. So we've got evidence perhaps of a Christian burial nearby. We don't have a body, but we have potentially part of the tombstone that went with it.
But there was one particular artefact discovered next to the church that is truly astonishing.
One of the most interesting finds from the domestic area surrounding the church is a beautiful copper alloy lid. It's backed onto some iron, and that has really aided its preservation. This is our copper alloy lid. It's got that lovely Triskel design, and these 3 round bits there are enameled in blue and would have perhaps even contained a gemstone. We're not quite sure, but you know, they're lovely as they are. As we turn it around, we can see that it's got an iron backing. And you can see on the obverse the organic material there. There is either a bone or a wooden box, something made out of an organic material that would have been underneath this covering. But you know, the important part, let's not forget, is that this design here, this beautiful kind of 3-spiral design, is originally a Celtic design. There is loads of examples of this in the National Museum of Scotland. However, it does get picked up with Christianity, so very interesting and very important Christian symbol as time moves on. And it tells us that the Dark Ages are not so dark, that all of these people who live at Vindolanda after the so-called abandonment of Roman Britain are not just savages who don't know how to read or write and have got nothing nice. They've got some pretty good material culture, and they've got a pretty cozy life here at Vindolanda.
The area around the church proved a gold mine for stunning finds. And things didn't stop with the copper lid.
About halfway through the season, on a particularly rainy day, 2 of our longest serving volunteers, David and Richie, found a rather lovely object. So this amazing sandstone altar represents a naked figure there with his funny hat. This could be plumes or maybe a crest. He's handing a spear. There he is with a spear. And is this a horse? Is this a mule? There is real care being taken in sculpting out the hoofs and the tail and even the mane. It's looking very lovely. And the gentleman's pecs and abs are very nicely outlined. A normal military man would be pictured in full regalia and full uniform, but the fact that this figure is naked makes us think that he's a god.
It's special and it's rare for a couple of different reasons. One, archaeologically, it's face up in the ground. So to survive to the quality that it has and the definition that it has over 1,600 years is amazing. Because normally anything face up that's made of soft sandstone will be weathered away to a nub, and you'll just get a very soft impression of what used to be there. Who is it? Well, that's a different story. It could be Mars, it could be various different figures. There have been lots of speculation about that. We may never know for sure, But what is really interesting to me personally is just how well carved it is. Now, a lot of our carvings from the site, particularly when we get into the 4th century context, are quite rude or crude. They're very amateurish, to be perfectly honest. They're local representations of something else. But this has got that classical style to it, and it's very well done. So it shows us that in the late Roman period, we've still got a few people knocking around who are really good artisans and can do some very good work.
It wasn't just the post-Roman church that removing the rubble layer revealed. The outlines of other structures emerged on the excavation site, including a Roman cavalry barrack.
So this is a real maze. Let's just pop through this door and have a look at the building before me here. And look at the difference in the masonry here compared to
It's like something, isn't it?
what we saw over there. Real higgledy-piggledy stones cobbled together. It's not a fresh quarry job like the other sections we were looking at. We've got 4 rooms here. 1, 2, 3, 4 cavalry rooms, each one for 3 cavalrymen and their horses. So much more space than you get on the infantry side of the fort. And in between the rooms and cut into the floor in the massive rubble you see before you, the foundations of those post-Roman buildings. What happened next appearing at Vindolanda on top of this 4th century barrack floor.
It's really interesting just looking at the archaeology that survives here. Not only do you have like these clear-cut established rooms that you see cavalry barrack blocks, you know, across Hadrian's Wall at Chester's, for instance,
Yep.
but also like this difference in the levels and how you see building material piled on top of each other.
You do see that very, very vividly here. And trying to put this cavalry barrack on top of so much other stuff has caused huge structural issues. And you can imagine actually living in this space, if you leant against a wall too much, a bit nervous because it might just come down or fall down the other way. So eventually this building wouldn't have taken a lot of help to fall down.
Excavating this unstable cavalry barrack was the next issue on the Vindolanda team's agenda.
As we were saying, the building has been reused quite a lot in the post-Roman period, but eventually once all of that is recorded, we have to go down and underneath to understand better the occupation of the site in the early and later 4th century.
As we've worked through that rubble and established where the floors are inside the 4 principal rooms of the barrack, we found some very, very nice material on the floor, particularly cavalry sort of stuff. So lance heads are what we would hope to find in this building, and we sure did.
There is a lot of designs for spears and lances. This one is particularly large and it's quite well preserved despite some corrosion happening on it.
It's a very thick head, isn't it? Yeah, for that lance.
Yeah, it's rather big, and one would imagine it's perhaps a bit impractical. Perhaps it's more of a showpiece, a statement piece, rather than a stabby piece.
This spearhead was just one of many uncovered in the cavalry barrack, again showing how this building once housed a contingent of spear-armed horsemen, patrolling this northern border of the Roman Empire and living at Vindolanda.
What do we think was the layout of this cavalry barrack? How would it have been arranged with the people and the horses?
So traditionally you'd have 2 rooms within each big space here. A simple division between the horses on one side and the people living on the other. And normally a big spine wall separating the 2. Now what this building doesn't have is the spine wall coming down the middle separating each side, which we have in the other barracks across the street. But we still get an essence of where people are living and perhaps animals were stabled, because we can see before us here the foundations, remains of dark earth ovens. I mean, you can imagine somebody, you know, everything from cooking their dinner on there to warming the bottom of their hands, depending on the weather. So this gives you a sense of how this thing was laid out. Where did people live and where did the animals live?
Roman cavalry at Vindolanda is a very interesting subject. There would have been garrisons and allee posted at Vindolanda throughout its history. However, in the 4th century, it seems like the cavalry is more of a troubleshooting element of the garrison. It seems like there is 2 main types of inhabitant at Vindolanda in the 4th century. There is the so-called minutiae, which are the frontier soldiers permanently based at the site, and there is the comitatenses, and it looks like the comitatenses would be the cavalry who swoops in, troubleshoots, solves the problem, has dedicated rooms that they can occupy at any given time, but isn't permanently based at the site and comes and goes really as they please.
So It tells us that we've got those two different groups, and that some people at Vindolanda stick around and some are actually officially pulled out by the army and the soldiers. And it gives us two different elements to what life would be like on the community here 2,000 years ago.
From the cavalry barrack to the church to the schola. So far, the team had excavated areas dating to Vindolanda's later history. But another primary aim of the 2021 excavation was to dig deeper. In particular, to find the traces of an enigmatic series of round structures, or roundhouses, constructed at Vindolanda during the early 3rd century, when the Roman Emperor Septimius Severus came to Britain and launched a series of bloody, genocidal campaigns north of Hadrian's Wall. Finally, as the excavation neared its end, the team turned their attention to finding these peculiar circular structures. And more.
So in the last month of the excavations on the site, we decided to go down below the level of the schola, looking for the circular huts, the round houses. One of the primary aims of our excavations is to learn more about that period, but also where we could start to get a sense of what happened with the first stone fort built on the site, the Antonine fort. And sure enough, as soon as we looked for it, that building started to appear pretty rapidly. And we were very, very lucky because only in the last week of the excavation, in one particular area under the rubble yard, we also came across the trace elements of our roundhouses, our circular huts. And here we got a real surprise. So where we're standing, this is where the church used to be in the 5th century. The church, its foundations kind of smashed the 4th and the 3rd century, which is great in a certain way because it's given us a quick view into what's below. And what's below are our Severan roundhouses. And we can see a stone curve of a wall coming out there, just on my left-hand side. And that's the footing of one of the traditional stone roundhouses that are built here, smothering this site during the Severan Wars. But what's really cool is we've got the dark stain coming around the soil here, swinging around this side. And what that is a timber version of the stone roundhouses, cutting out the stone foundation of the roundhouse next door.
You can see where that timber was really well, can't you? It survives really well, that line.
It survives very, very clearly. And you can imagine a little wattle and daub fence in there, you know, a timber version of the much bigger stone buildings. But what's cool about this is it's showing us that we've got multi-phases within that roundhouse period. This is this period of conflict, the Severan Wars, and they've got enough time to knock down the stone ones, modify the site and start putting timber ones up. So it's not just a flash and a pan moment in the history of Vindolanda, it's much more significant. And this is the first time we've ever encountered a multi-phase in our roundhouse period, where you've got one building cutting out another.
Not only is it the fact that when we're talking about round structures here, which seems unusual in itself for a Roman fort, but also the fact you have this evolution, as it were, like with the forts of Vindolanda, from wood to stone.
So normally we get wood to stone, but here we've got stone being knocked out by wood and then being replaced by stone. So who did this? What's this all about? Why get rid of a perfectly reasonable stone house and build a little timber one instead?
And why construct them as roundhouses?
So they mirror construction of local buildings, such as the Iron Age roundhouses, which are so abundant in the area. However, the Iron Age roundhouses are generally enclosed in round ditches as well, while these ones are very carefully arranged in a very military fashion. So it's really interesting to see a round building where you expect a square one, but you know, the Romans are apt to throw some surprises into Roman forts at all times.
The last month of the excavation revealed these traces of roundhouses, but they also revealed the remnants of the first stone fort at Vindolanda, constructed around 150 AD, some 80 years after Vindolanda was first constructed by the Romans.
It seems that the change from timber to stone is connected with the abandonment of the Antonine frontier in Scotland and with the repopulation of Hadrian's Wall and the recommissioning, if you wish.
And there is that sense of permanence creeping in to an otherwise situation where the garrison would always think, we're going to be on the move, we're going to go back into the north of Britain, we're going to finish the job. And ultimately, we're going to go home, wherever home is. We're going to get out of Britain because we'd have done the job and the island would have been pacified and we no longer need to stay here. Well, of course, history teaches us that never happened. They stuck around till the very, very end.
Choice get made about what stays and what goes, and what forts are going to get a massive refurb and what forts are going to be ignored. And Vindolanda seems to be one of those forts that gets a really nice refurb, gets some lovely Antonine building, beautiful washhouse, amazing courtyard building with lovely opus signum, waterproof floors. So we're privileged in that we seem to have been picked as a reasonable choice for stone refurbishment.
One area where they uncovered an interesting structure from the first stone fort was beneath the cavalry barrack.
So in this space, Tristan, looking under the cavalry walls here, you can really see Stone Fort 1, our very first stone buildings at Vindolanda, starting to emerge. And how lovely they are, how regimented, the very cute little blocks of stone. The masonry gets better the lower you go too. You know, what is this building? What is this space? That's the question. What that we're starting to show up here. The rooms are really cute, they're really small. So it's not a traditional barrack by any sense. And so one of the options that we might be looking at here are the remains of a hospital.
How often is it that we find a building that we can say this is a hospital at, let's say, some of these sites along Hadrian's Wall?
It's really, really rare to recognise these spaces. There's the well-recognised and well-known Housestead's example up the road, a stone-built version, and we've had timber versions here for sure. But to actually get a hospital in this period, the Antonine period, when Housestead's isn't operational, when Hadrian's Wall's not being used, of course it makes sense because there are no other facilities nearby. And if there are lots and lots of forts operational, you don't need a hospital in every one. But if there's no hospital for 20, 30 miles, then that's a whole entirely different story.
From these earlier, lower down structures like the hospital, the Vindolanda excavation team started unearthing more stunning artefacts.
As we reach in the lowest level, as we abandon the 4th century and the post-Roman period, and we reach down into 213 and earlier, you know, the early 3rd century, we are starting to get better preservation. And once you get to the Antonine period, to 160 to 200 AD, you start getting some rather beautiful stuff. One of the most striking finds was a beautiful millefiori brooch, and these are disc brooches which are covered in enamel which simulates a flower meadow. So as you go down, the preservation goes up and the finds become more and more intriguing and their preservation becomes more and more surprising.
But all good things must come to an end. And for Vindolanda's excavation team, this end was the weather.
So this, Tristan, is why we don't excavate normally at the end of the season, because look at this, it's starting to open up, it's getting dark and it's only sort of mid-afternoon. But what advantage point to look at the multiple layers of the site from here. So at the very, very bottom, we've got our 2nd century stone buildings, cobbled streets starting to come out. We're standing here on top of this very large 3rd century wall, and that in turn has a 4th century building on top. And we had a rubble yard and church over to our left. And of course all the rubble on top of the building we're standing in. This is a real multi-phased stone site we're looking at right now.
So the visitor who comes and sees Vindolanda while we are excavating, but also while we're not excavating, we'll be able to catch a cut through, a sort of section in time of what happened at Vindolanda from all the way to the post-Roman period to about 160 AD. I think it's really fascinating to walk through a place in which you have a time slice. You're traveling through time as well as traveling through space.
But what's most exciting of all is what's still to come.
So under the stone buildings in this part of the site, what we hope to find next year or the year after, but hopefully next year, are the foundations and the surviving parts of a commanding officer's house that was built at Vindolanda a good 100 years before the structures that we're looking at now, the earliest of the structures, the Scola. Now that commanding officer's house was partly excavated on the other side of the fort wall by my father in the 1970s, 80s and 90s. But at least half of the building is under the space that we're looking at now.
And of course, that's not the only timber building that will be there. There will be a host of buildings, 5 or 6 structures, one on top of the other, until we get down to the farmer's field that Vindolanda is sitting on in its entirety. So this is where the real excitement is going to come next, as we get into those anaerobically preserved soils, those rich deposits where not just the inorganic stuff survives, like your brooches, your bricks, your tiles, your coins, your spears, but where your boots, your shoes, your leather, your wood, your textile survives. And that gives us such a much more diverse set of tools in which to tell the story of the site.
Reaching these lower down, highly sought after soils, however, is easier said than done.
So to get through to the anaerobic level, you've got to get under the foundations of those heavy stone buildings, and that's no mean feat. We've already talked about the rubble and how challenging that is. Well, the foundations for those heavy buildings, meters of clay. And the only way to do it, well, is to roll up your sleeves, get a spade out and dig through it. It's back-breaking work.
But the rewards make it all worthwhile.
Look at that.
This is the start of the wooden preservation on the site. Now, I'm standing on a stone wall. It's the first stone fort built inside the perimeter of this one, before this one's even a thing. But that stone fort had timber versions, and what you're looking at down there is the first timber version of the Antonine fort.
No way.
So that's fort number 6. There are 5 more forts below this one. Now this gives you an idea of, looking back across the site, how low we need to go to get to the farmer's field at the bottom before the Romans turned up. How much earth material is yet to come out of the excavations.
I noticed the soil above this wooden layer. Thick. That must have taken a lot of effort for you and your team to get through.
This is hard work. This is hard work. And between every layer like this, you have another ½ meter of turf and clay, and there's nothing in it. It's very, very, blank. They've just put it down in a hurry. They're digging it out of the ditches to make the ditches and knocking down old ramparts to do it. So we leave a little section open like this to see how it will cope with the winter time. But also the water gives us that protective layer, slows the air down. This buys us enough time to get the job done properly.
So we've opened little windows to really check what we were in for in the next 2 years. But the real work will come when we will lift that cobbled yard and go underneath to explore those anaerobic layers.
A task that will require a lot of time and a lot of effort.
I think there is a misunderstanding that archaeology equates treasure hunting. Even the ugliest, biggest, baddest boulder of clay tells us something about the construction of the site. So don't be under the impression that we just throw some plastic explosive there and blow it all up in order to get to the interesting and cool stuff.
Well, Andrew, this has been amazing looking around the site, coming back here. So it was only a year ago we were standing over there looking at all the stuff that you were to uncover this year. You've done that and more, and literally it sounds so exciting for the year ahead.
It does. It's very, very exciting, and I can't wait to welcome you back. I hope this time next year so you can see what's happened underneath all of this.
It promises to be a very, very exciting 2022 indeed.
The 2022 excavation will begin in March next year. Backed by an army of passionate staff and dedicated volunteers, the show goes on.
The work at the Vindolanda Trust doesn't stop during the winter. The work really goes on behind the scenes. Every year we're committed to updating our museums and putting the latest finds on display.
So my archaeological team, headed by myself, we're a small part of a much bigger machine. And the most of the people who come along and take part on the excavations are volunteers. They're giving their free time to come and join us for 2 weeks to help us on this endeavour.
The volunteers are a very important part of what we do.
We end up welcoming 300 or 400 volunteers every year to the excavations. And they're an incredible and amazing bunch of people. They have to learn the skills and the techniques and to gain the confidence that they need to do the job well. It's wonderful to see them grow as individuals and to see their experience give them so much joy and pleasure. And that helps to feed the energy that we need to keep going through a long and hard season.
We're excited about next year's excavation because we've had a glimpse of what's to come. And really, untangle the puzzle of the roundhouses. Are we going to have more? Are we not going to have more? Are they going to be made of stone? Are they going to be made of timber? And finally, under the roundhouses, that's the gaping hole, the anaerobic, waiting for us with its tantalizing secrets.
Looking at the site now, as we do, we know and understand thoroughly that the best is yet to come, because we're just about to enter the organic preservation layers of Vindolanda over the next few months of excavation. And when we do that, it'll completely change the order of magnitude of the sort of material we can get coming from this site. It'll blow us away what we're going to be finding coming out next. So it's been great. We've learned a lot about Vindolanda over the past 12 months and the past 6 months of excavation, but the best is definitely yet to come.